Hi students, here's Lesson 8, Early History of Ocean Study, looking at how humans have been interacting with the ocean. Check out the vessel here. Very simple, it's like an inverted basket floating on water. So when people first took to the ocean, they did not have nice ships like we have now. The topic of early ocean exploration comes under the heading of voyaging, which refers to the exploration of the ocean to establish trade routes for warfare, religious freedom, and perhaps colonization of distant lands. We'll look at some of the groups that did some of the early voyaging. Polynesians were perhaps the most accomplished sailors, at least of their time. They island hopped from Indonesia, and according to archaeologists, then moved across the Pacific Ocean to Easter Island and Hawaii, using very fast double-hulled canoes. So even if the wind was not blowing, they could still paddle and make pretty good time. Looking at early Europeans and Arabians, going back 3000 BC to 1700 AD, they explored the coast of the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. In general, they liked to stay inside of land because they didn't really know how to navigate, especially at night. So you've got a couple of examples of the ships they used, the Arab dhow, which is actually still being used on the Red Sea, and the Greek bramine, which used a combination of sail and oar power. The Vikings, 700 to 1000 AD, they mainly motored around northern Europe. They would colonize some of North America eventually using their longboats. One thing about these longboats, as you look at the images of them, they had a very shallow draft, and the Vikings were very powerful. They could actually row these longboats up rivers in England and also parts of Europe and surprise people. So they were very accomplished invaders, not so much for colonization. They just wanted to pillage and take their plunder back home with them to Scandinavia. Here's some of the Viking routes. So certainly they focused on Europe and what is now England, parts of Scandinavia, but eventually they branched out across the North Atlantic Ocean to Iceland, Greenland, and North America. We actually have solid evidence of their dwellings in Labrador and parts of Newfoundland. So the Vikings were very accomplished and very bold as well on the ocean. So that was voyaging for reasons other than science. Voyaging for science started in the 1700s. Ocean-going nations realized they needed a lot more detailed information about the ocean. So to gain that, first they wanted to travel more safely and efficiently across the ocean. And navies and shipping companies, they needed knowledge. And that knowledge included locations of safe harbors on distant shores, natural resources, things like building materials, fresh water, food, and whatever else you might need to sustain yourself. And thirdly, they wanted to know about these significant ocean currents. So a good question, why would knowledge of currents be helpful to early sailors? Here's a great example. Ben Franklin, one of the founders of the United States of America, he did some of the original mapping of the Gulf Stream, but he based it on descriptions by captains of fishing boats who were actually out in the water. So he compiled all their information and started putting out maps that showed the flow of the Gulf Stream, and he made a lot of money doing so. So the image on the lower left shows Ben Franklin's map, the original map, showing the Gulf Stream. That's in the dark, headed from Florida and then out across the North Atlantic Ocean. On the right-hand side is a modern satellite image of the same Gulf Stream, and you can see that Franklin's map was pretty accurate, showed the location of the Gulf Stream as well as the direction it flowed. Another aspect of voyaging for science, organized explorations. And these began in the 1700s, first by Captain Cook, a British naval officer, very smart, very intelligent, and a very wise man. He led 3 major voyages into the Pacific Ocean. His main quest, mapping the coasts and currents as he traveled, he was one that determined that Australia was actually a continent, not an island. As he traveled, Cook would interact with the natives wherever he went, and he discovered many islands. Why is discovered in quotes, you wonder? Well, it's because people were already there. These lands had been discovered maybe thousands of years before Cook was actually the first European to discover them. So he gets a little bit of credit, but not complete credit. And you can follow his different pathways looking at the different colored lines. So he definitely focused on the Pacific Ocean, but he went all the way around the planet. For the United States, our first exploring expedition, 1838 to 1842, led by a young Lieutenant Wilkes. He had 6 naval vessels along with him as his convoy, and their idea was to project U.S. military strength worldwide. You can see an image of Lieutenant Wilkes as well as his main ship, the Vincennes, and that's in Disappointment Bay. Accomplishments of the U.S. exploring expedition: circumnavigated the globe. Everywhere it went, they collected mineral specimens from the shallow ocean, trying to learn about the ocean floor. Also, they made excellent coastal maps that were used by later explorations. In the later 1800s, British Challenger expedition really was a groundbreaking expedition. It was the first purely oceanographic investigation of the world ocean. They outfitted a naval vessel, the HMS Challenger, loaded it with scientific equipment, taking off the cannons in the process. So the British Challenger's crew of sailors, scientists gathered deep ocean sediment, biological samples, and chemistry data from all the oceans. They were very careful as they went, kept all these samples safe. Eventually they returned to England. It took them about 4 years. Once they were back in England, they spent several years processing their data. So on the left you have an image of the Challenger's laboratory that's on ship, and on the right some of the specimens they collected and preserved. Those scientists from the Challenger expedition eventually published a 50-volume set of journals, and the significance of this is that it now serves as the baseline data for present-day oceanographers. When we're currently studying ocean temperatures, salinity or acidity, we can now go back to the Challenger's reports on what they gleaned from the ocean and compare it. So this is really good baseline data for scientists today.